Right, so this is what we're talking about today. We look at systematic reviews, what it is, how it works, why we do them. Right, so that's what we're looking at today. And of course, we'll go through appraisals of this, next week when we meet up. So anytime you see an article or paper described as a review, it comes in different varieties. It could be a narrative review, or it could be a systematic review. So if you ever see a review of the treatment of viral warts, or a review of the treatment of, I don't know, primary prevention for heart disease. Anytime you see the word review, ask yourself, what kind of review is this? Was it a narrative review or a systematic review? The thing is, systematic reviews are usually described as systematic reviews, but narrative reviews are often described as simply reviews. And you're always left wondering, you've been wondering, when there's a word review, what kind of review it is? And there are differences. So a narrative review, the question it asks is often broad, like, what are the treatments that exist for viral warts? That's a kind of broad question. Remember, we ask an answerable question in the format PICO, which is usually very specific, right? So that doesn't really fit PICO format. What are the treatments for viral warts, right? That's our review actually named that. And they looked and they went into all the different treatments for viral warts. Never in an article, they talk about so often those reviews are very broad, whereas a systematic review is often very focused. So I can ask a question about the treatment of viral warts, and I can ask in patients or adults with viral warts, does salicylic acid compared to placebo lead to cure? And that's more specific, right? So systematic reviews often focus on a specific PICO question. When you do a narrative review, the people doing the review don't sometimes always look for all the possible sources. They may just do a literature research, and the first article that comes from PubMed, all right, yeah, we write about that. Whereas a systematic review, if you do a systematic review, what you should do is actually look for all the possible articles. And we'll see in a bit how you could try to do that. How you pick these studies for a narrative review is usually biased. Usually authors, if they have already a bias in terms of prescribing a particular treatment and they want to write a review, they would look for all these studies that only they would say, well, I only going to look at all these studies that support my stance on this matter and quote those studies. People would say, well, this thing real reference, boy, the evidence really supporting what they say. But they only look for the studies that support what they say. So the sources that usually ends up in a narrative review is often not exhaustive, is often biased. Whereas in a systematic review, the way you actually search for and get all these studies of interest is based on criteria set before. So these are the studies we're going to look for. We're going and appraise them, regardless of what the study finds. When you do a narrative review, sometimes you don't go through an appraisal. So what we just went through just now was appraisals by tree. You'll just appraise randomized control trials. When people do narrative reviews, they don't often go through this process that you all went through, right? Whereas when you do a systematic review, you have to appraise the studies. You have to go through all the studies, just like how the three groups who went through the studies went through it just now. So you already seen a systematic review is plenty, right? There's plenty. Usually when you do a narrative review, what they would just report on is qualitatively. They're just going to a description of all these studies. So these are the studies that looked at this particular treatment. This is what they found. And when you do a systematic review, you would do sometimes what we call a quantitative summary. You try to quantify the results. Quantity means numbers. You try to show the results as numbers. Just like how you all showed results just now using numbers, using p-values and confidence intervals and mean differences. You would have a quantity. So for these reasons, usually a narrative review, the inferences fit is not always evidence-based, it's often biased. Whereas a systematic review is often evidence-based, right? So this just says essentially what I said on the previous slide, but the extra bit is it said that systematic reviews could be qualitative only, or sometimes, or often, probably more often than not, it is often quantitative in addition to being qualitative, right? So usually both. And we'll see what the quantitative systematic review means, this thing called a meta-analysis, right? So we'll come to that just now. So the whole thinking behind systematic reviews was because of this guy. You all probably heard about the Cochrane collaboration. The Cochrane collaboration really is a repository of a whole set of systematic reviews, right? If you want to find a systematic review, you could look on this collaboration. And just for now, just look at their logo. Their logo is this circle with a vertical line and these horizontal lines across. You see what that means just now, right? So you'll kind of have an idea what this means. But it was this guy's thinking that he said, and this was what, 30, 40 years ago, it's a great criticism of medicine that we have not organized a critical summary by specialty or subspecialty of all relevant randomized controlled trials. So what he actually thought is we can't look at one randomized controlled trial and practice medicine based on it. He said, well, even if a randomized controlled trial was done well, we should probably try to find all the randomized controlled trials that look at the same thing. So if you want to know if vitamins really make a difference for cognitive function, we shouldn't just look at the one study and say, that one study found no difference. If we listen to that, then we'll close down all the vitamin companies. Let me see if we could find all the other studies that look at this. Maybe some of them found a difference, maybe some of them did not find a difference. So it was his thinking that we cannot practice medicine based on the results of a single study. We should try to find all and put them together. And the systematic review was born. Just to remind you where the systematic review is at in the hierarchy of evidence, at the very top. The study that carries the greatest strength in medicine is a systematic review. And by the end of this short lecture, you'll understand why, right? What I would say, and we'll go through most of these study types in at least the first 5 study types in this course. What I would say is you could do a systematic review on all the other studies. You could do a systematic review on RCTs. You could do a systematic review on cohort studies. You could do a systematic review of case control studies, right? So you could do a systematic review of all the other study types that exist, right? So if the question we're looking at is one of treatment, then you do a systematic review of RCT. If the question you're looking at is etiology or prognosis, then you'll do a systematic review of cohort studies or case control studies, right? But regardless of the systematic review is based, the systematic review carries the strength, greatest strength in medicine, right, at the top. So this essentially just says what we were kind of describing. A systematic review in itself, you do a systematic review without looking at an individual patient. In all the studies you all discussed just now, they have to recruit patients. They have inclusion and exclusion criteria for people who have dyspepsia. They have to get people with uncontrolled hypertension. They have to get patients and bring them in. Systematic review, you actually do not look at an individual patient. What you look at is individual studies. So the subjects of your systematic review is not patients, it's other studies. That's why they call it a systematic review. It's a review. A review simply means you're looking over what has been done already, right? So that is what a systematic review is. It looks at other studies done. And it applies scientific strategies to try to come to a definitive conclusion. The methodology that is reproducible. So if I describe to you how it is to do a systematic review, someone else should be able to repeat that same systematic review following those guidelines I use anywhere else in the world, right? This essentially just says what the words actually mean. So systematic means there's a system to what you're doing. There are guidelines to be followed, right? And a review means is you're just overviewing, you're looking over what has been done already, right? So that's the word systematic review, right? So you're looking over some things that are already done, but using a system. And we said that if the systematic review is quantitative, we call that a meta-analysis. And a meta-analysis, remember M for maths, maths is statistics. A quantitative systematic review is where we use statistical methods to combine several studies, right? And we see what a meta-analysis is. So, I mean, why we want systematic reviews? We say we shouldn't practice medicine based on one trial. So the SPRINT trial came out and it suggested benefit in lowering people's blood pressure lower than 140 or 90. And it said, yes, there's a difference. We shouldn't be quick to practice medicine based on that trial. So there have been systematic reviews of many studies looking at the same question. Does intensive treatment of blood pressure compared to normal treatment of blood pressure make a difference? The reason we need systematic reviews is we can't keep up with research. I believe an individual RCT. That means every time an RCT come out, you have to do an appraisal. Like, how long it take these guys doing an appraisal? They're complaining. They wake whole night, they lose sleep. There are the 9 people who do appraisals, right? So imagine doing that every time you see systematic review. I see a randomized control trial, right? Which not shaking her head vigorously, right? Not me again, right? That is what she said. So because one difficult to do reviews on all the possible research, it's difficult to do possible research. Every day it have thousands of articles being published literally in PubMed. Only 1% of the medical literature is done perfect and well. So, well, I mean, when you read something, statistically speaking, chances are it flawed. Just by chance, statistically speaking. Because if we say only 1% in medical literature is done perfect and well, it means where your readers are already biased. You don't have time to read 100 articles and then appraise all and then figure out which is the one that is the good one out of the 100. I'm going to follow that one. Nobody had time for that, except the people who do systematic reviews. Right? They are the only ones who have time for that. We can't practice medicine based on the results of a single study because that one study could be biased. Study is done well, it could be that it produces findings out of your channel. Right? Remember, we say a p-value of 0.01 means there's still a 1 in 100 possibility. The findings could have been due to chances. Right? So there's the reason why we need systematic reviews. This is just. So what we'll go through is the process of doing a systematic review, and we'll go through these 7 steps. So these are the 7 steps in actually doing a systematic review. The first step you are actually already know. Formulating a problem, asking an answerable question. It depends on what it is you want to find out. What is the ones people do next week? I can't remember. Does cinnamon really lower sugar level? Does garlic really treat hypertension? Right? These common things that patients, I don't know if patients ask you all these things. People ask me these things. Right? Does it make a difference? Talk about not good for anything. Systematic reviews have been done on all these topics. So if you look it up, you'll see the interesting answers that we find. So the first step in doing a systematic review is ask yourself, what's the question we're trying to answer? Right? What we're really trying to figure out. So you're looking for PICO. The first question in the appraisal for systematic review is the first question in the appraisal for RCT. Did the study ask or try to address a clearly focused question? First step, right? So that's easy. Second step, locate studies. Suppose I told you all we want to really figure out if omega XL, omega 3, 6, and 9 fish oils, right? Fatty acids, that's what it is. Does that really make a difference for heart disease? Right? And I tell you, go and find all the randomized controlled trials that looked at fish oils and heart disease. How you go search? How you'll find it? PubMed. So you search PubMed. PubMed always is search, right? So you'll search PubMed, you find some studies. Would you find all these studies of interest on PubMed? You're not going to find all these studies that have been done on PubMed. There are 2 reasons. Some are not published. So some studies never got published, so it never will end up on PubMed. The other reason why you would not find a study on PubMed would be, probably might notice, not all journals are indexed for PubMed. Caribbean Medical Journal, that ain't indexed for PubMed. If something appeared in Caribbean Medical Journal last month and you look in PubMed, you're not going to find it. Because CMJ is not indexed for PubMed. So not all for PubMed. It's the next big disappointing thing. We as faculty, as staff, to tell us when we publish, we should publish only in journals that index for PubMed. So in the search rate, you find it, right? So how you find then studies that are not on PubMed? What you do? How you find them? What you say?
Axi Librarian.
Axi Librarian. That actually is a very good answer because librarians can actually search and they actually help us find information. So how we search? So we search PubMed, sure. We search Google Scholar. You might find things then, sure. But the assumption is the research you're looking for is published. So why research would be done but not be published? There's a reason. Have anyone here done research but did not publish it? People shaking their head, right? When I ask this question to my undergrads, all of them say, oh yeah, come out here to research. Some of us didn't publish ours. Some 1 or 2 hands might go up and say, yeah, no, we publish ours, we're going to publish ours. So why it is research would be done and not be published? What's the reasons you think for that? You could draw on your own personal experience or experience of others. Why? The results didn't make sense. So who said the results didn't make sense? So it could be that you felt the results to publish studies because they feel the sample size was small. They didn't get enough people. You know, they want to get 400 and they only get 80. So it's like, I think I want to publish that. What's the other reasons we don't publish stuff? Laziness. Time. It takes lots of effort to publish a paper. It takes lots of effort to publish a paper. I tell you, I just published one of my research that are the medical students, many about 3 or 4 years ago, it's promised all of them will publish it by the time they graduate. So by the time they intern, the name immortalized on PubMed. Did that for the group who now become interns and finishing up internships. We did a simple survey. We asked GPs about their treatment of hypothyroidism. Prof. Tillotson did a survey 16 years ago, and he just wanted to see if things have changed in terms of the practice. And it took like almost a whole year to publish this thing. You write the people, and they say, all right, we'll consider it. And then they say, well, you know, you have to review this, you have to change this. And then they change it. And then they send it to them. And it's like, no, I have to change this now. And you do that back and forth like 4 times. And 2 months. You know, and after in the end, then it's like, it's good. We're going to publish this thing. So it takes effort to publish a paper. It takes lots of effort. You have to please the journal reviewers. And then the other reason why sometimes people would do research and then not get published, I mentioned it last week, is some studies are called negative studies. Negative studies because the treatment wasn't better than the placebo, right? I did a randomized control trial for my DM. I tested whether a topical treatment could relieve neuropathic pain. The people who got the treatment got pain relief as much as the people who get placebo. So when a person in our journal, you know, reading this thing, it's like, well, we really do that about it. The people who get the treatment get good just like the people getting the placebo. That really makes sense. I don't want to publish that in my journal. I remember when I finished it, you know, finished it past DM and finished the research. It's like, I go and publish it. So the first people I write the big wigs, diabetes. Then after a few weeks, I waiting to write them back, I get excited, I get a reply. So looking at the email now, you know, so thank you for your submission. We receive over 300 every month. And then they went on to describe how they assign a score to all the ones that they get based on priority and findings and all of that. And mine didn't quite make it in the score to be accepted in the top 30 that out of the 300. So it was a fancy long line that we are telling me, nah, we are publishing anything. No, exactly. We are publishing this. So, and the reason they probably didn't publish it was because it was a negative study. I mean, the word itself negative is a negative connotation. Negative didn't mean the treatment made people worse. Negative studies mean the treatment was as good as the placebo. But nobody wants to publish that. So eventually I wrote a next journal and they said no, and they recommended about 3rd journal and get published, put this published. But that tendency of journals not wanting to publish results that are not publication bias. Publication bias is the inherent tendency in all journals because at the end of the day, people want the journal to look good and to sell. It's a business. So they want only that the research that is published looks fancy, it grabs attention. So it means what you're reading in the literature already is slanted towards making the treatment look good. That's what it means. Because if people only accepting studies where the treatment worked or was better than a placebo, it means then for probably 5 studies where the treatment was better than placebo, you have to wonder, it probably have 20 studies where the treatment was not better than a placebo, but they were not published. So what a systematic review says, no, we have to find those studies. So my question to you is, how you find unpublished data? Not on PubMed and not on Google. What you have to do, you write people and you beg them. You say, hey, I understand you was doing this work, this big research, I saw the protocol published, but I never saw any results. Can you share your data? Right? Do research, they talk about it in a conference. NCRHA have the research day next Thursday, right? So the presenting research that people doing, right? MedScience have their own medical students. It was last month. So NCRHA have their own next Thursday. And sometimes people publish, they present their research, and they present it and it's good research and people's like, yeah, that's good stuff, and they don't bother to follow up and publish. So what you could do, you could go to conference proceedings if you're looking for unpublished material. Go to all the conferences that was in Trinidad and say, hey, let me see what was actually done. Sometimes they have a listing at the abstract. Right? We just did medical research day with our medical students, and we have a list of all the abstracts from all the literature groups. Right? So you could find unpublished material, but it's just difficult and nowhere to look. Gray literature is just like that. It's theses or reports. Plenty of people do for the DM, they do research. Right? They do research. People, when they do the DM, they are about it. And I would see lots of them, I would see them, have them, and I'd say, hey, this publishable, you know. But when they finish the DM, what happened to them? It's big consultant, right? They're studying to publish nothing, right? They only do the research project because they have to do it to finish to get a DM as a requirement to write their exam. After that, nobody is studying anything. They do good research, and I tell them, hey, publish this thing. After that, they're busy. So It means, though, that lots of good research sometimes is done that doesn't end up in the literature, and we shouldn't turn a blind eye to it. That's really what we see. If a study was done in China, Chinese, you're looking for the literature, how are you going to find it? You've got Chinese database. I know somebody can tell me Google Translate, which is fine, which you could use. And based on Google Translate, you could translate stuff, but it's very, very, very difficult. Of interest, I also involved in a systematic review right now. So one of my friends who I went to med school here with, she's abroad, she's in the States, she's a rheumatologist. So she's actually doing a systematic review, looking at, and her systematic review is at that. The question we ask is, can ultrasound diagnose Sjogren's syndrome? You know Sjogren's syndrome? Not a common thing we really see often, but it's a condition where you're not making, tears, saliva, your glands, or autoimmune thing. So to diagnose Sjogren's syndrome, I don't know if you all know, to diagnose Sjogren's syndrome, all kind of fancy things, Schirmer testing, and you could do salivography, put dye in your salivary glands, and all kind of fancy thing. Like, yeah, who's do that? Right? Radiologist says who's do it. That is who's do it. In America, I don't know, maybe in Trinidad as well. So it's kind of difficult to diagnose, but what have happened in literature, they've shown that ultrasound, if you do ultrasound, take a probe, person sitting right here in front of you, just put it over the glands and look at certain features of the glands, you can diagnose Sjogren's syndrome. So we almost close to concluding or finishing up a systematic review and meta-analysis of ultrasound in the diagnosis of Sjogren's syndrome. So we went through the literature search. I could talk from experience. So she told her librarian to find, and the librarian did find. The librarian found 300. So what we have to do is, now we have to go through all 300 articles and decide which ones are of relevance, which ones answering the question we have. Patients with sicker symptoms, does ultrasound compared to gold standard diagnosis diagnose Sjogren's syndrome? And when the librarians search, they actually search the literature. Even sometimes people do research and they only publish abstracts. So ACR, American College of Rheumatology, they have lots of year and they publish in an abstracts for their conferences. And you only find the abstracts on ACR website. You don't find the abstracts on PubMed. So the librarian actually have to find all of those. So when we find all these studies, the next thing we have to do now is critically appraise them. So first we find all these studies for systematic review. The next thing we have to decide and ask our question is, are all these studies really what we're looking at? So out of the 300 studies we found 65 were of interest. We could only conclude 65 was of interest by going through all, by reading the abstracts of all. So we each independently had to read 300 studies. And we decided, all right, 65 of interest. These are the ones we go in. These are the ones that we're interested in. These are the ones that answer the question. So we found those 65 studies. What we have to do now is critically appraise each one. So we have to do what you all just went through. Right? Shall we? A few days, a few sleepless nights, a week. So we have to critically appraise all of these 65 studies independently. So a systematic review is plenty good, as you can see. It is a lot of work and effort. But it is worth it at the end because the conclusions I get from it beats any individual study. And when we go through an appraisal, what kind of questions we asking? Were the studies valid? Were there sources of bias in the study? There are different questions they would ask, and it depends on what kind of study types you're looking at. If you're doing a systematic review of randomized controlled trials, you might think, well, go on appraise this RCT now, but I'll save you the trouble. And I shall tell you this before, but I'll let you all do the appraisal first, and after I'll tell you the shortcut. So the shortcut to appraise the study, just to know if RCT was done well, one of the shortcuts is this thing called a JADAD score. So a JADAD score is a quick way of just looking at a randomized controlled trial. And it's not a full appraisal, right? So I'm probably mistaken in likening it to do an appraisal, but it's a quick way of knowing if an RCT is valid. So the JADAD score asks these questions. Was the study described as randomized? So let me just pick one of them, the vitamin study, right? Vitamin study. Was the study described as randomized? Yeah, so they get a point. Was the method used to generate the sequence of randomization described and appropriate? Yeah, you thought they described it appropriately. All right, so how much? 2 points? 2 points. Was the study described as double-blind? 3. Was the method of double-blind and described and appropriate? Identical placebos. You think? Yeah, all right, 4. All the study going real good. Was there a description of withdrawals of people who dropped out? 5. But you could lose marks. The doctor point of the method used to generate sequence of randomization was described but inappropriate. And the doctor point of the study was described as double-blind, but double-blinding wasn't used. So based on this, you could end up with a score, Gerard score, -2 to 5. So based on this, yours might be 5. You might say that's great. So if you're doing a systematic review, you could actually say, look at that. You could just glance probably the abstract or skim through a paper, and in a few minutes, work out the Gerard score for RCT. So in a few minutes, is done kind of okay well. Of course, those are not the only things we look at, right? And doing an appraisal. So in doing a systematic review, you might decide that I only going to pick studies with a Gerard score of 4 or 5. I only want the studies that are done well, right? Studies with a Gerard score less than 3, the quality of those studies is not good enough for me. I want really good quality studies, regardless of the findings. So that is one of the ways I could do it, right? For RCT, this is specifically for RCTs. Step is now when you identify your studies, like in the one that I do, we identify about 60 studies. Now we have to collect data from all these studies. So we have to abstract data from all these studies. So we have this never-ending Excel sheet, right? A whole set of columns going all the way down with just numbers. And you have to extract the numbers from the studies. You have to take the results out, right? Save it, code it, put it somewhere, right? So you collect the data from all the studies. And the next thing you have to do is analyze and present the results that we are now, where we're trying to analyze the results. And then analyzing the results, you do this thing called a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is what? The quantitative aspect of a systematic review. A meta-analysis is a statistical software or technique that actually looks at the data and it presents what you call a forest plot, right? And we see what that is. Okay, I think, is it now? Soon, we'll look at that. And then when you look at the results, it the conclusions. And then the last step in a systematic review is to improve and update the review. Suppose I tell you there is a systematic review done in 2019 looking at omega-3, 6, and 9 fish oils and heart disease. In the next 10 years, if people do 50 more randomized controlled trials, then they have to repeat the systematic review because things change, new evidence come up. So you might have to repeat and update the review. So if you look for systematic reviews on XL, omega-3, 6, and 9 disease, you're actually going to find about 10 systematic reviews. First one done probably in 2000, and there have been many done since. Because the reviews need updating. Why they need updating? Because they are based on studies, and more studies become that may meet the eligibility criteria. So when we go through a critical appraisal next week, the groups who do the critical appraisal of systematic reviews, this is the checklist really that you're going through. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but you'll see the kind of questions they'll ask. Did the review ask Cliff? Did the authors look for appropriate kind of papers? Were all the important papers included? Did they find all relevant studies? Did the reviewers assess the quality of the study? You're not going to say that they find all the studies, and you only want the high quality ones. And we'll see what these are the questions. What are the results? How precise are the results? Similar questions to ours. Some questions specific to meta-analysis, right? So this is the checklist which is posted online on Moodle that the groups who do the systematic review for next class. But the big thing I want you all to get, or one of the big things in this in systematic reviews, is this thing called the forest plot. They call it a forest plot or a blobogram. Don't ask me why they call it a blobogram or a forest plot. Maybe it has blobs on the screen, but this is what it looks like, right? This is what it looks like, right? So this is what a meta-analysis looks like. All of them kind of look the same. They have this vertical line, and then they have these horizontal lines with squares in them, and a big diamond at the end, right? All look familiar to anyone's logo? Oh, yeah. This is the Cochrane's collaboration logo. So the Cochrane's collaboration logo is really a forest plot. It's a picture of a meta-analysis forest plot. This was a study that looked at inhaled corticosteroids and the effects on the treatment of asthma. Right? It's just an example. So this high versus moderate here is saying high dose inhaled corticosteroids versus moderate and the effects it has on asthma. Right? That is really what it is. But let's go through what it means, right? So this is the forest plot, right? So what it is really a graphical representation of the meta-analysis. So when you do the meta-analysis, which is something statistical software does, the output it generates is this. The output it generates is this graphical thing with these lines and the straight line and the little diamonds and the squares, right? And what it does, it shows the results of all the individual studies. Each line is an individual study, right? And what it also shows is the combined result in the end. It shows the what the diamonds refer to, the combined results, right? In terms of each study is represented by a horizontal line and a black square. So this first study here is represented by this horizontal line and this square. This study here, the second one, is represented by this horizontal line and the square, and so on, going down the figure. These horizontal lines, the horizontal lines, refers to the 95% confidence interval that study found. So just now in the past groups, we saw that studies found a 95% confidence interval for things like digit span and memory and cognition, and it gave a range. If you had to show that graphically, it would be the width of the line, right? That's what it would be. So the line width refers to the 95% confidence interval. The squares, if you notice, vary in size. This one's small, this one's small, this one kind of big, this one kind of in between. So what the black squares, or the area or the size of the squares, refer to is the weight of the study. So sometimes a study like this meta-analysis here combined 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 studies. Ideally, well, not ideally, what would happen is you would assume that if all studies are weighted equally, each study would be weighted 20%, 5 studies. But they don't do that in reality, in practice. Studies more than others. If you look at this study, it was weighted the most. I can't tell you the exact figure. Sometimes there's an additional column telling you the weighting. But this study is weighted the most. Why do you want to weight a study more than others? The reason why you might want to do that is that study probably was bigger, had more people, and the study was probably well done. No possible biases in the study. So if it was high quality and had lots of people, you'd want to put more weight on it. So maybe I just say, maybe this 1,000 people and it was well done, whereas this tiny study probably had 100 people, right? And this is something the software allows you to do. It allows you to put how much weight you want on the studies. What do these diamonds refer to? These diamonds refer to the meta-analysis for the studies above. So this diamond here refers to the overall results for these 5 studies. It's these 5 studies combined into one refers to, right? So these 5 studies here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are represented all together as this diamond. This diamond here represents actually all the studies above it, right? So usually that's what the diamonds refer to. The diamonds refer to the combination of all these studies above. Now, in terms of the center of the diamond tells you exactly how much the value was. Imagine me drawing a line right through the center of the diamond here, this diamond at least, this one here that we're looking at, and it coming all the way down to probably like about here. Then the center of the diamond might be, let me just say, is 10, right? The center of this diamond, you'd see it's kind of close to 0. The center of this diamond might be probably a little bit more than 10, right? Now, the horizontal tips or the widths of the diamond, right, which is represented here in this line, refers to the confidence interval. Just like how we can have a confidence interval for the finding of an individual study, we can have a confidence interval for the diamond, which represents all the studies above. So guess how we interpret it? What do you think the interpretation is? The interpretation has to do with this line here running straight down the middle. This line here running straight down the middle has a value of 0, and WMD is not weapons of mass destruction, is weighted means difference. Weighted mean difference. That is all we hear about. Not so? And we said if the weighted mean difference, or the mean difference in the studies we looked at today was 0, what that meant? There was no difference between the studies. Exactly. So this line actually refers to a mean difference of 0. And this horizontal line, you could see crossing this vertical line. So that means the confidence interval in this study included the value 0. So you could just glance this and say, well, this study found no difference. This study found no difference. Actually, all the studies in this meta-analysis found no difference because the horizontal line is crossing this vertical line of 0. And the horizontal line, if it crosses the vertical line of 0, means it includes the value 0 in the confidence limit. So none of these studies found a significant difference. So it's not too surprising actually to see that the diamond, guess what the diamond is? The diamond represents the overall results of all these. What's the weight of the confidence interval? Plus 1.5 to 13. Does that include the value 0? You don't need to look at the numbers to know if it includes the value 0. You just have to look at the graphic. You see it crossing the line. Once it crosses or touches this line, it's non-significant. This one, does it include the value 0? For sure, 0 smack in the middle, right? How we know? Minus 8 to 10. It includes the value 0 because it crosses this vertical line. How about this one? You ain't too sure. You kind of see the tip maybe kind of touching it. You might want, but here we see is 1.3 to 20.9. Does that make a difference? Yes. So this study, this meta-analysis, which represents these studies combined, found that there was a difference because the value doesn't include the value 0, and it favored higher dose. So what these studies found is that moderate dose compared to low dose, moderate dose was much better. Right? That's what that study actually. Now, if this vertical line was not mean difference, but relative risk, what would be the value here? 1, most correct. So if this was a study looking at relative risk as opposed to mean difference, the value of no effect would be 1, right? Perfect. Right. So what's this thing called heterogeneity? Heterogeneity means what? Different. Heterogeneous means, if I say a group of people are heterogeneous, it means some characteristic. In trials, in systematic reviews, heterogeneity means the studies that they looked at, the many studies they found were heterogeneous, were different. Now, how studies could be different? Remember, RCT, if you're looking at RCT, a randomized controlled trial looks at a particular echo. So you could ask, well, studies could be different because the patients they look at were different. The interventions and the outcomes they tested, the outcomes they looked at was different. I could look at another study looking at, again, vitamins and cognitive impairment, and that study probably could have looked at young people. It could have tested a different multivitamin supplement. It could have used a different measure of cognition as opposed to digit span. The study asking the same question, but the two studies are different studies. So we would say if the studies use different patients, different interventions, and look at different outcomes, we would say the studies were clinically. Clinical heterogeneity means the studies by their design, by virtue of the people they ask, were different. That's clinical heterogeneity. Statistical heterogeneity is different. Statistical heterogeneity means the findings of all the studies, the results, were different. Right? So don't mix up clinical with statistical heterogeneity. I can tell you a study, a randomized controlled trial that looked at something. One study found the relative risk of 1.5. The next one found the relative risk of 0.5. Another one found the relative risk of 3. Another one found the relative risk of 0.1. These studies finding completely different findings. So because the individual results are so different and so varied, we say that is statistical heterogeneity. Right? So how we could figure out if statistical heterogeneity exists? Right? There are different ways. Right? 2 average men having an average meal. It's a relative thing, right? So one of the ways we could figure it out is by just looking at the studies. So if we just look at the studies, and if I ask you all these studies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all these 12 studies, you think they found similar findings? How you answer that question? By just looking at this picture. You could look at it that way. How many times the squares to the left or the right? So you think they're similar or different? Most to the right, so most similar. All right. Yeah, that's one way to do it. What's the other way we could do it? You could look at the diamonds if they line up. That's another way. The other way you could look at it is the confidence intervals if they overlap. Do all these confidence intervals overlap? Yeah. In other words, is it possible for me to draw a line and that line would go through some studies and not go through others? Kind of possible. If I draw a line like here, maybe if I draw a line like here, but most of the confidence intervals from the studies kind of overlap. I may show an example later on where it did not overlap. So visually, you could look at this and say, well, the studies kind of looking as though they kind of finding similar findings visually. Like just watching the studies and making a judgment call. So that's a visual test for statistical heterogeneity. You could also do it statistically, right? So to do it statistically, what you use is a test called the chi-square test for heterogeneity. And when you do this test, you're going to get a value. This kind of curl of x is chi-squared. Chi, that's the Greek letter. You're going to see a chi-squared value and you're going to see a p-value, right? You're going to see a p-value. So when we say the p-value is more than 0.05, what we say? Not significant. And if the p-value is less than 0.05, we say it is significant. But anytime you see a p-value testing a hypothesis, you have to ask yourself, what is the hypothesis being tested? The null hypothesis says null, no difference. So the null hypothesis says there's no difference in the heterogeneity. In other words, these studies are homogeneous. Get that? So the null hypothesis says these studies are homogeneous, they're similar. So if we get a non-significant p-value, it means we accept the null hypothesis. These studies are really similar. But if we get a significant p-value, it means we have to reject the null hypothesis, which says these studies are similar, and conclude that the studies are. So the rule is, if you didn't understand that rationale, if I lost you, the rule is the p-value is significant for the Cox-square test for heterogeneity, then it conclude the p-value is significant, that heterogeneity. What it means is the individual findings from all the studies differed significantly. Now, why that is important? We say it's important because of what we say. One of the limitations of the meta-analysis technique is if the studies produce different findings, it's inappropriate to combine the studies into meta-analysis. It's inappropriate. So we want to be kind of showing similar findings for us to say, let's combine them in a meta-analysis. If the heterogeneity is significant, so if the p-value here, this p, is less than 0.05, then you conclude that significant heterogeneity exists, and it probably was not appropriate to combine the studies in the first place. Right? That's the interpretation I'll leave here. The question you might ask as well, if there is heterogeneity, why they do it? Why they do it in the first place? In this case, you know, the p is 0.78. No. So it means the studies were similar. So you see, it kind of matches with our visual look, right? Because when we look at it, most study confidence intervals overlap. So the way I could kind of figure it out is probably the opposite of the way I phrased it just now. If you could draw a line through all these studies, then they are similar, right? So is it possible to draw a line including all these studies? Like here, yeah, you could draw a line like here, this one that we see in here, it will include all. If you can't draw a line and touching all these studies, then you could think, well, the study have findings that show very different findings, discordant findings. And if that is the case, we say it's inappropriate to combine them. Now, someone usually brings to my attention that the p-value that we would use, is it this one? No. The p-value that we would use actually is there on one of the slides. There's some, is 0.1, right? So the p-value for heterogeneity is a little bit softer. The significance level actually is not 5%, it's 10%, right? So p-value less than 0.01, they can say significant heterogeneity, right? So anyhow you take it based on this measure. Is this less than 0.01? 0.78? No, it's more. So we say the studies are similar, so it was appropriate to combine. So I would pause here. Comments, I lost anyone in so far in terms of interpretation. We go through an example, right? So we go through an example. 0.01, yeah. If it's less than 0.01. 0.1, sorry, 0.1, yeah, correct. 0.1. If it's less than 10%, yeah, 0.1, not 0.01, 0.1. Right? So that's it. Now, there's another measure that they use to tell if there's statistical heterogeneity. And we'll come across that one in the example I'm going to show you all. And that measure is something called I, the letter I squared. And we say that there is significant heterogeneity if the I squared is more than 50%. Just take it by root, you know, it's just significant heterogeneity if the I squared is more than 50%. right? So we go through an example. Before I actually go through the example, something else I want to draw to your attention, which may be confusing. A possible source of confusion, I want to mention it now. You're seeing other p-values mentioned on the slide. Anyone notice? How about the p-values mentioned on the slide? Seen a p-value here, seen a p-value here, seen a p-value here, and a p-value here, seen a p-value here, and a p-value here. So the first p-value is the chi-squared p-value. This is this thing called the Cochrane Q. Right? The Cochrane Q chi-squared is this one. You see the chi-squared and the p-value. You see this thing df, degrees of freedom. The most important thing is you want to look at the chi-squared and the p-value fit is this that comes after. Now this thing called z, I'm going to avoid z is, but this z thing has a p-value with 0.012. This p-value tells you if this meta-analysis found a significant difference. Now, did this meta-analysis find a difference? The diamond crossing the vertical line of 0. It found no difference. The p-value actually, it says overall, all these studies found no significant difference because the p-value was more than 0.05, the usual p-value we use. Look at the z, look at this z and the p-value here. Did this diamond find a significant difference? Yeah, it was 1 to 20, not touching the vertical line. Look at the p, significant. So this p-value is for the overall effect. So sometimes you see a p-value for the overall effect, but we don't really need this p-value for the overall effect. We could look at the confidence and come to the conclusion. But I made the point last class of saying in the forums, if you ever see a p-value and the confidence interval provided for the same measure, they usually mesh. The p-value is significant, the confidence interval excludes the value of interest. If the p-value is non-significant, the confidence interval includes the value of not interest. How will you interpret this p-value here, this one? Not significant. This referring to this diamond. I mean, this diamond showed no effect, right? So when you look at a meta-analysis, you might see two p-values sometimes. Always look at the one that has z next to it is the one for overall effect, and the one that has chi-squared next to it is the one for heterogeneity. Yeah. If you see something called I-squared, which is a measure of heterogeneity, is a statistical test measure of heterogeneity. What we spoke about so far was this chi-squared Cochrane Q test. A point here, the other statistical test that exists is one called I-squared. If it's more than 50%, it means there is significant heterogeneity. And what we say if there is significant heterogeneity, it was inappropriate to combine these studies. If there is significant heterogeneity, it means statistically the results were very dissimilar among the studies. And it probably wasn't very appropriate to combine them in a meta-analysis in the first place. It means take the findings with a pinch of salt. So, Marie.
So then that p-value, the last one in the middle,
this one?
That one.
Yeah.
So then that is showing significant heterogeneity.
Well, this is not for heterogeneity. That's the point I'm making. You have to look at this one. This one with the z is for overall effect. This p-value with the z telling us about this diamond. What this p-value here, chi-squared, telling us if overall all these studies produce similar findings, right? That's what it's telling us. So you'll see two p-values, that's what I mentioned. P-values on this meta-analysis. The one with chi-squared is for heterogeneity. The one with the z is for the overall effect. You actually don't need this one for the overall effect because you could look at the confidence interval and make that determination anyway. But where both are provided, they always gel. Anything else confusing anyone before we go into our example? Yeah, chi-squared for the heterogeneity. And these p-values that we look at here is the usual 5% that we look at. Anything? Hello?
So,
no? Guys online, you okay?
so a good p-value for clinical significance is less than 0.05, but a good p-value for heterogeneity is more than 0.1.
Perfect interpretation. Yeah, I couldn't say it better. Thank you for saying it. Right? P-value of more than 0.1 actually means there was not heterogeneity and it was appropriate to combine these studies. Right? Let me go try an example. So this example is an interesting example. I don't want people to get any ideas. This example looked at a systematic review on if alcohol consumption is associated with heart disease. Now, just based on the title of the study, what kind of question do you think this is about? You think this is about randomized controlled trials? Can you randomize some people to drink plenty and randomize some people not to drink, see if they get heart disease? Bishma looking like she's considering it. We can't do that, right? Right, so we can't do that. So this is a systematic review of cohort study, right? So I didn't change it. I was trying to decide if to show a systematic review of RCTs for you all as the very first example they would see. But I said, no, I'll leave it because I want to emphasize the point that systematic reviews could be done on the other studies. You could do a systematic review of RCTs, a systematic review of cohort studies, a systematic review of case, a systematic review of diagnostic studies, as the one I'm working on, right? So that it emphasizes the point. So it's a systematic review and meta-analysis. So let me look at this, what they found. So they set out to answer that question, right? Whether or not alcohol consumption influences cardiovascular disease. And what they did, they searched the database. They looked for about 60 years, right? 1950 to 2009. And what they found, they included cohort studies, right? That's what they looked at. We'll talk about cohort studies in week 4, but they included cohort studies. And they found 4,000. So they found 4,000 studies. So you know what they had to do? They had to sift through all those studies and figure out which were the ones that were cohort studies looking at alcohol use and heart disease. Right? Now, it seems daunting. They actually didn't have to read all 4,000. You could use the limits on PubMed to exclude studies. Right? Remember last time we spoke about in terms of how you do a search? Right? Yeah, so you could use that. And out of the 4,000 studies they find, how much they include? 84. So they went through 4,000 studies and excluded them and come up with 84. And this shows the process, how they went through it. This was what they found in the initial search. This is how they exclude some studies. If you notice, out of the 4,000 that they found, they excluded the majority of them, 4,000, you've seen it here, because the study didn't report on alcohol intake. I mean, it's kind of easy, not so difficult. It's not like they have to read 4,000 studies and say, there's a study of interest. It's not too bad. But they still end up with 84 studies looking at different outcomes. Cardiovascular death, cardiovascular coronary artery disease death, death from stroke, and incident stroke and incident coronary artery disease. So if you get the disease and it kill you, or if you just get the disease itself. These were the results. Relative risk, that's what they reported on, something we spoke about last time. The relative risk for alcohol and alcohol drinkers compared to non-drinkers was 0.75 for cardiovascular mortality. So the outcome is something bad. If the relative risk is less than 1, that suggests that the people who drink have less heart disease. Tell you all, don't get no ideas, right? Don't get no ideas. I know it's Friday. So 0.75 means there was a smaller chance of heart disease in people who drink compared to non-drinkers. Confidence interval 0.7 to 0.8, is it significant? 0.7 to 0.8, you're asking relative risk. Does it include the value? 0.7 to 0.8, does it include 1? Statistically significant. They found that 0.71 for incident coronary artery disease. So not death from heart disease, but if you just get heart disease. 0.7, significant again. Coronary heart disease mortality, if you die from coronary artery disease, 0.75. So far, it seems as though alcohol and drinkers compared to non-drinkers preventing people from getting heart disease and from dying from heart disease. Statistically significant. There were incident stroke, though, it was 0.98, 0.91 to 1.06. Not significant, it includes the value 1. 1.06, 0.91 to 1.23. Not significant. So it had no significant effect on stroke and stroke mortality. This is what one of the meta-analyses look like. So the first thing you do when you're looking at a meta-analysis, first thing I like to do is look for the line, that vertical line. And that vertical line here, see, interested in the one that shows the line of no effect. In this case, what you're looking at, relative risk, and look, the line of no effect is 1. Therefore, all the studies that touch this line show that there were no differences in drinking versus no drinking and heart disease. But look at this study. Did this study find a difference? Yeah, it does not include. Look at the range, 0.7 to 0.9. It found that it was protective. So look at that. This study, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. A lot of them show a difference, show no effect. So guess where's the diamond at the end? The diamond at the end is the meta-analysis for all these 20 or so studies. What the diamond concluded? Is it significant? Yes. You could confirm 0.7 to 0.8. And it does not include the value 1, so it is significant. What's the next thing we look at in a meta-analysis in a forest plot? We just looked at it. Heterogeneity. And look, we see in this thing here called I squared. I squared is 70%. More than 50%. So that tells us there was significant heterogeneity. So that means it was kind of inappropriate to combine these studies. What it means is statistically the results, the relative risk for all these studies was so different, it was inappropriate to combine them. Is it possible to draw one line through all these studies? No. So if it's not possible to draw one line through all these studies, it tells you at least a study have a significant result. You could tell that this one, and this one are outliers. I mean, even these, the confidence interval kind of running here. But this one, look at this one. This one clearly is an outlier, same as this one, right? So visually, you could tell these studies were heterogeneous because the confidence intervals, some of them not overlapping with the rest. So it's not surprising that the I squared here is more than 50%. If we had a p-value for the Cochrane Q chi-squared, the p-value would be, right? But it don't provide a p-value for Cochrane Q here. What they provide here is a p-value for overall effect. So this overall p refers to this diamond, right? So anytime you see a p-value, you have to ask yourself, is a p-value for what? Is a p-value for heterogeneity? Or is it a p-value for overall effect? Sometimes they'll describe it as overall effect. Sometimes they will see the p next to z, in which case you know it's overall effect. So this p-value here describing this diamond, which we know is significant. This value describing all the studies together, how dissimilar they were. Right? We're going again. How do you interpret this one?
The I squared is supposed to be, the limit is 1.5 or 5.0?
5.0, sorry, 5.0, half, 50%. Right? So if it's more than 50% 5.0, then we say significant heterogeneity, statistical heterogeneity exists.
Okay, thanks.
How do you interpret this one? Look at the diamond. Yes, I squared, significant, more than 50%. So again, it was inappropriate to combine these studies. So what that means is when you see do a meta-analysis like this, but obviously they combine all these studies, right? They publish the paper. It means you have to still take it with a pinch of salt, because one of the limitations with the statistical technique is the study should be similar in findings, right? That's just how a meta-analysis works. That's just how the statistics works. How about this one? Yes, yes, Anderson.
If you see this, right, and then you decide, well, okay, this look like those few data, but leave this study out.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that affect your outcome?
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting to mention that sometimes what they do when they do meta-analyses is they omit some. So they repeat the meta-analysis by omitting some studies, and they look at the overall effect at the end. If when they omit some studies, the overall effect is null, crossing the vertical line. But when they include all these studies and not crossing the vertical exclusion having an effect on the final results. That's what it means. So sometimes they do that. They do what we call a sensitivity analysis, right? That's exactly what they would do. But when you see this and it tells us it's inappropriate to combine these studies, there are other techniques that they use in statistics to cater for it and handle it. There's something they use called meta-regression, right? They combine the statistical technique of a meta-analysis with regression, and that allows for the differences between the studies to be combined. But for your purposes, it's good enough to say it's heterogeneous, take the findings with a pinch of salt, right? It's good enough to say that. Okay. This one, diamond is non-significant. It includes the value 1. You could see crossing the line. You could confirm 0.9 to 106. I squared. More than 50%. That's right. This one. Crossing the line. I squared. 73%. That's right. This one.
Significant.
Significant. This one is significant. That's right. I squared. Heterogeneous. That's right. That's correct. So the conclusions of this study was light to moderate alcohol consumption is associated with reduced risk of cardiovascular outcome. The question is what we do about that now, right? Right? Joanna probably thinking she should bring drinks in addition to the donuts now, right? Right? You see, some people wanted it, some people, right? Well, what I'll keep in mind, and we'll talk about this in week 4, these were cohort studies. Cohort studies follow up a group of people who drink, and then follow up a group of people who don't drink, and let's look to see if they get sick. That design by itself is very prone to what we see is confounding, because the people who drink plenty could be doing other things that may be helping their life. Could be exercising. It could be that, I don't know, it could be doing different things. So the problem with this systematic review is the studies it was based on was cohort studies, and cohort studies were any hierarchy evidence. Intentionally, the systematic reviews that I ask you all to appraise next week, I believe, are all randomized controlled trials. So they all look at treatment. This one looked at causation, right? But the systematic reviews we'll be looking at next week look at all randomized controlled trials, right? So they would be, I think, yeah, that's more or less it. I think there would be, we have them here. It would be, right, yes, cinnamon and diabetes, does it make a difference? Right, cinnamon and diabetes, right? Work interventions or work-based dietary interventions on employee obesity, and tamsulosin, I mentioned this when I spoke about RCTs, the tamsulosin versus placebo really make people pass out stones. We saw that, I showed you all one trial on it. So this is a systematic review of all the trials that was ever done. Right, and I'm picking these, I try to pick recent things. Most of these articles, all of them are recent, like published like this year or last month, you know, just to show something of interest. Right, so check out the forums. The forums is based on things that, questions about systematic reviews.
All of the process you showed us have the ice cream that was more than 50%. How common is
I suppose it's variable. It depends on the studies that you look at they combine. So, I mean, probably half and half, you know, probably half and half. So, I mean, even when the ones that you guys look at when you do your appraisals next week, so when you do your meta-analysis, say how to interpret it, right, based on what we speak about. But sometimes studies are combined and they're very, very similar. You know, that one that I showed with the asthma and the moderate versus high and low versus low is that one showed no significant heterogeneity. But anytime you see significant heterogeneity, it makes you wonder. The other point I would say is if I show you a forest plot and I tell you, well, this is here as a forest plot, and I ask you if the studies are clinically heterogeneous. Can you see? Clinical heterogeneity means what? It means that the study, exactly what they tested, exactly. You can't tell that from this, no. This only shows you the results. So this only tells you, allows you to comment on statistical heterogeneity. You can look at this and comment on clinical heterogeneity. Now, you could guess or probably infer that sometimes variation have arisen because the studies were designed very much differently. But you can't still look at this to make that determination. You have to look at the individual studies and read them. So usually when you look at a systematic review, they would have a big table of all the studies they include. And they would have what was the patient average age, what was the intervention was tested, what was the control, what was the outcome they looked at. If I have to do a study looking at medical, looking at one of these, I'll pick this as an example, right? For the people who have to talk on use and diabetes. If I tell you one randomized controlled trial, tell people drink the powder, and the next one tell people take 2 tablets 3 times a day, that's different. If one study compares cinnamon versus placebo, and the next study compare 500 milligrams cinnamon versus placebo, is different. You compare same PICO, but it's different. So is it appropriate to combine those studies? What do you think? No. You could argue no. You could say, well, they're looking at such, they're not comparing the same thing. You're kind of trying to compare lines on oranges, right? That's really what you're trying to do. So that's one of the things you have to decide on when you look at a systematic review. When they combine the studies, if the studies were clinically heterogeneous, then they should not have. And then even if they combine these studies, you have to look at the individual results to see if they were statistically heterogeneous. And you could do that visually, or you could use the heterogeneity statistic. I think I post some links online to videos to check. Let's have extra stuff in addition to the lecture that you can read and peruse at your own, you know, time. So any questions again? Any questions about systematic reviews? You can understand why is the study that carries the highest strength in medicine, because it tries to put together all the studies and generate one definitive conclusion. That is actually why a systematic review is actually so good, because a systematic review actually tries to find all the studies of interest, be the ones that found, the ones that did not find significant findings, and combine them. So actually all the guidelines that we use now, that we practice medicine based on, is actually based on systematic reviews, not individual RCTs.